Hey, welcome to new episode of podcast with Abhash. And if you are new to our channel, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have Facebook, we have Instagram, and please visit our website in podcastwithavas.com. And as usual, I have a new guest. His name is Sixit Bhatta. So you might have known him from, well, if you have taken any ride in around Nepal in scooters or motorbikes, you might have used his app called Tootle. So we'll be talking a lot about those and his background in entrepreneurship. So I would want to welcome Mr. Sixit Bhatta. Bhai, welcome to Podcast with Avash.
Thanks, Avash. Good to be here.
Oh, definitely. So I'm really glad to be connecting with you, especially I've been hearing a little bit about entrepreneurship and having a lot of Nepalese being interested in business and so on. And when I came upon the information that Nepal had been working a lot with a lot of development in the Uber side or in the say Tootle side of area where people uh, use different apps for transportation. And your app came up from my. I got that information a little bit about your app, and I'm like, okay, there's a lot of talk we can have, and I would want just to give a little background and Mr. Sitidai. Uh, j- can you give me a little bit background by yourself?
Well, you know, I started my career back in 2002, which is a long time ago, almost 20 years as a telecom engineer. After I graduated as a telecom engineer, and I had my career in telecom company. Then I moved on to a bank, worked there for 5 years. So, I've had almost 12 years of experience working for others. And back in 2013, 2014, I decided to move on from
Mm.
my job in a bank. And after that, we tried to do something new. So, and jumped into this idea of entrepreneurship in my 30s. And that's how it all began. And in 2016, we uh, started our operations, and 2017 January we went live commercially. So that's the story of Tootle in a nutshell. So that's a brief background about me.
Yeah, that's
I've been a
awesome.
telecom professional, moved on to being a banker, and then now I'm an entrepreneur.
That's
But for anyone who would want to know me, I think I'm I like to learn every time, and so
so you have a little
it's
bit
a process of
background
learning.
on telecommunication, and you eventually end up being an entrepreneur. So
Mhm.
tell me a little bit about Tootle. I know a lot of audience might have already known and used your app, Tootle, which is
Mhm.
pretty much covers the area around Kathmandu Valley, and is it around more than that?
No, it's right now it's only inside Kathmandu.
So, uh,
Yeah.
so is it? Does it only cover like specific area, like a radius of some
No, no,
sort?
no. We are pretty much functional throughout the valley,
Mm.
so that's how we are. Yeah.
Okay. And you have,
Yeah.
as a for a lot of people who are new to the app itself, so you can. It's more
Hmm.
similar to Uber or Lyft app,
Hmm.
where you
Hmm.
anybody can. It's a ride-sharing app, so you can
Yeah.
just register it and call for your ride, and somebody with a scooter or a motorbike
Hmm.
comes to pick you up and put leave you to your destination, which is similar to taxi, except it is more advanced generation of mode of transportation from my perspective. Is that what? Is that a good
See,
definition?
yes and no. I
Hmm.
mean, when we speak about entrepreneurship, when we speak about what we are doing compared to what people like you who live in the West are exposed to in terms of ride-sharing platforms like Ubers and the Lyfts of the world, the fundamental differences on not in terms of the design, look and feel, and what the app does. Basically, if you're hitching a ride on an Uber, or you're taking a lift on a Lyft, or you're taking a Tootle, functionally, you're doing the same thing with the app, right? Functionally. But there's a fundamental difference. The fundamental difference is how Uber came along and how Tootle came along. Where does Uber operate and where does Tootle operate? Okay. So to begin with, I think if we're speaking about Ubers of the world, it comes from Silicon Valley. And when we're speaking about Silicon Valley and US, we're talking about developed countries that already have an existing transportation infrastructure. Okay. So, for example, if you have to go from downtown Dallas to somewhere in the suburbs, you can easily find public transit. In Europe, you can easily do. If you have to go from Manhattan to Queens, in New York, you can just get inside a subway and do it any time of the day, any day in the year, right? So it comes from a place which already has an abundance of options in terms of people's mobility. That's the first thing. And therefore, an app like Uber or Lyft just adds to the convenience of your mobility needs. Convenience. The second thing that one also needs to possibly understand is that in the West, the employment rate is very high, meaning the unemployment rate is very low. People find jobs, that's how the economy kicks in. People make a living, even though it might be paycheck to paycheck, but unemployment is very low, right? So it gives people an option of having more flexibility in their income options. But when you come to countries like ours, mobility is a need that's not been fulfilled by any infrastructure. Right? You might have seen if you were to visit Nepal in recent times, there would be a sea of people waiting for a public bus, and they would be cramped inside. Okay, so that's the first thing. So we do not have a public mobility or a public transportation infrastructure, and therefore, Tootle does not add to the convenience. It adds to the necessity of people. It is necessary for your day-to-day mobility. Okay, that's the first thing.
That's really interesting.
Because what you see,
perspective, yeah.
So if you were to move from point A to point B in Kathmandu without having your own vehicles, motorcycles, cars, whatever, you would find that people lack their freedom of movement. If you're in the West, if you're in Europe, if you're in US, like you would not be restricted in your freedom of mobility because you have your public transit and all sorts of things. Here, unfortunately, people lack the freedom of movement. Okay? So while Uber or Lyft adds to your convenience of mobility, Tootle is about enabling everyone with that freedom of mobility. And freedom is the fundamental necessity. And freedom of movement is something that adds up to your economic opportunity. That's on the first side. On the second side, when it comes to the jobs, we are also speaking about a country that has a high level of unemployment. The people who are having to migrate to Middle East or Malaysia, there are many people who don't have jobs. So here for them, it's not just about flexibility of income. So it's not like uh, in New York, Manhattan, where a person would do 10 to 5 in a bar and then go out driving Uber to make an extra income. It's about giving them the income opportunity, the basic income opportunity, and therefore it adds up to more impact. Okay, so it's not just about doing business and increasing value of the company. It's about creating more impact. So emerging markets like ours would be the engine of entrepreneurship and economic growth, because most of the people are in dire needs of such innovation.
Yeah, just
So that's a different perspective.
yeah, just having that perspective is really interesting. I would also add, yes, Nepal having such a large population concentrated in Kathmandu Valley, and
Mhm.
I remember I grew up in Nepal until I finished my high school. So every day I was in New Road. I live in Gongobu, so I had to wait in line for the any public transportation we could find. Me and my mom used to go back like cramped up in a microbus and so on. So any option that adds up that comfort of being able to go home at night regarding the safety as well. The more the night, the dangerous the streets get. So that any option of people being able to go home after work is a level
Mhm.
of how's it, level of as a gift. It's more like a gift of safety as well as the freedom of transport uh, to move around is such a
Mhm.
valuable thing that a lot of people in the West don't realize. However,
Yeah,
yeah, even
that
even in the West, I would say it's not as easy as we think perceive it to be. Up here, there's a lot of problem as well. So same thing with Uber
no,
and yeah,
US has a lot of problems
yeah,
because
it is.
the entire economy of US was developed around the General Motors and Detroit and
Yeah.
cars, because they never invested on public
Yeah,
transportation.
the whole
But this,
system up here is like you either need. I'm just talking about the United States, specifically in Texas state. You need a car to move around. So there is a problem for public transportation as well. There are not many buses, and there are not many other way of transport. There's no microbus or anything as such. The
yeah.
when the Uber and Lyft came here, it was such a relief for a lot of people as well. So I know you are saying in Nepal there's a necessity, and in
Mhm.
up here in the United States it may be an additional facility, but almost there, the concept of ride sharing is a necessity everywhere. I would even add up United States has a necessity of such option to take additional way of transportation because taxi you can't call them that much. It doesn't feel it almost feels like a rip-off every time I take a taxi, even though the price may be competitive with Uber. And Uber, I used it Uber and Lyft like a couple of times, and it made me feel safe. It made me feel secure that once I land out of an airport or land out of any place and reach somewhere, I can
Mhm.
just call that service and I can go to my destination. So it gives me a value in my way of life just by having that app and not relying on taxi because the taxi is really, I would not say taxi is a valuable service, but it's not. It still did not add up to having me a secure way of transportation. So you
Yeah, yeah.
having like invented or you having started the Tootle feels a really great entrepreneurship that I praise for your work.
Thanks. When you spoke about the kind of necessity that you feel using moving around in Texas, in Dallas. The problem with U.S. economy is that U.S. economy was built around cars. It was built around the roads because U.S. never invested on public transportation. And I don't know if you've been to Europe, but if you go to Europe, Netherlands, France, and Switzerland, um, even Spain, you'd find that they've invested on public transportation. The best public transportation that I've seen is Amsterdam, Netherlands. Okay, where people just cycle to a train station, put their bikes inside a train, just move around, and you don't even need Uber, because those people they've invested on public transportation, which unfortunately is not the case in many places in the US. New York has good public transportation. It can get you from point A to point B pretty much safely. Uh, but the entire economy of US revolves around building bigger roads. Bigger roads means bigger cars. Bigger cars means more fuel, more steel, more jobs, more oil. Yeah, and if you look at the sense of opulence that people have there, is it's crazy, because in last 20 years, I think the average size of car has increased from 1 ton to 2 ton, but it just carries one person. And if you go to every household, you'd find cars for a husband, wife, their children.
Yeah,
It's
the culture
but
here.
we
The
yeah
culture here is really individualistic. So
yeah
you can, I know, like having a culture where we travel in groups in Nepal, like with friends and so on. Up here, whenever I came here, it's just such a different culture. People don't stay too near each other. They prefer their own car. They like to go around, even just hanging around with friends to go somewhere. Instead of everybody going inside one car, we call it carpooling. Even that is not used that often. It's more like, let's carpool, but everybody's like, I'd rather bring my own car. There's a complete different culture here. Everybody needs their own car, wants their own car, and that's a difference between here and in Nepal, where people prefer to go together.
but that also means that you are spending a lot of energy
It is.
in moving from point A to point B. If you look at the per capita energy consumption of a person living in US, he or she would consume around 370 gigajoule per year. That's too high, which has uh, uh, which which means that you're driving bigger car, you're traveling alone, you're eating a big steak, to you're heating, to everything. So
Yeah,
US consumes per capita energy consumption in US is the highest in the world,
yeah,
followed by Canada at 300, and it just halves to around 150 to 170 in Europe. Uh, that's a very high usage. So when you share mobility, when you pool cars, when you take a public transportation, you are consuming a lot lesser energy and having a lesser energy footprint. So, behavior of sharing mobility not only impacts in enabling people with the freedom of movement, like I said earlier, but it also impacts in how we can help build climate resilient societies. How we consume lesser amount of energy, and that's one thing.
yeah. Is
The
that?
other thing that you also,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
the other thing is that if you look at the global uses of real estate on parked vehicles, I think it's around 4 trillion US dollars, right? So say you move from point A to point B in Dallas, you have a bigger car, and if you look at an average American, they would have a bigger truck-sized vehicle. Texas would have even more, I know. The big trucks, the
That's like
Chevrolets and the Fords.
the trucks
Yeah,
almost outnumber the regular car. I don't know that if
yeah,
that's the right data, but when I'm driving, it feels like so.
yeah. So you have a truck at your house that occupies X amount of square meters, which is a cost because that's a real estate. Then you drive that truck from your house to, say, downtown, and then you park and go to work throughout the day. That truck is actually occupying a real estate, and that real estate could be used to do something else. If used properly, it could create community space. It could create open space where trees could grow, where you can have a football field. You could play basketball, do anything else, right? So, but if you share a ride, if you take a Uber or Tootle from point A to point B, you're freeing that space up, right? And
That's a
when you
really
free it,
different way of thinking at it.
right, you free up that space. And once you free up that space, because a car sitting doing nothing for 10 hours a day is a waste of steel, is a waste of space. So if people are sharing mobility, it also means that we can move around with much lesser number of vehicles. Okay, and that's where the future would be. When we talk about autonomous vehicle, when we talk about AI-driven cars, these cars would just be moving around. They would not be parked. They'd just be picking up people, dropping them off, picking up people, dropping them off, right? And if you're sharing that mobility, you could actually do with a lot lesser number of vehicles because people don't need cars. Okay, people need mobility.
Yeah,
People
definitely.
need to move. People need to move from point A to point B. They don't need vehicles. Of course, they can use vehicles as a means of adventure or traveling. You know, just think about how we've evolved in the last 30, 40 years. And you having lived in Kathmandu, people would cycle, isn't it? Cycle was the main form of mobility. But as people graduated to motorbikes and cars, the way people now cycle is mountain bikes, more expensive. The same with the way people purchase motorbikes in US. They do it for a recreational purpose. They don't do it for mobility purpose because their mobility needs are already met by something else. So, I believe that I think we are at the cusp of changing the way mobility would happen. And as and when it does, the way we use vehicles will be more recreational in nature. The way we are now using mountain bikes and the way people purchase big BMW bikes to move around interstate in US,
Yeah,
not as a means of mobility, but
that's definitely a quirky way. I would not say quirky. It's a different way of approaching the transportation. Is like we exactly don't need cars or transportation devices, vehicles. We just need a
mhm,
mobility, a method of mobility that's more
yeah,
suits our convenience,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
it doesn't have to be a car. It can be ride sharing or anything at all. Public
It could be
bus.
walking.
Yeah,
It could
we
be
could be
walking,
walking.
isn't it? Yeah. Think about the way our infrastructure is developed. Now, I don't know about Dallas because I haven't been there, but most of the cities in US, if you're just going a little off the main city, then you need to drive at least to the train station,
Yeah,
right?
but Dallas
You,
has like one, well, I can't say it right
you,
one, but really
you,
less
yeah,
train stations.
yeah,
One big route, and a lot
yeah,
of them. Everybody is more like travel, car.
yeah,
We need to go
yeah.
from one place to
So,
another.
so,
Is absolutely car
yeah, but
based.
but if you go to say Europe, if you go to Netherlands, you don't actually need a car. You don't need to drive to a train station because train stations are very close to you. So their mobility is based on the last mile mobility is walking or cycling because you can pretty much cycle to the closest train station
Yeah, Europe's
or walk.
small. Almost anybody in the United States would like always make fun of Europe. Like they are
No, but
small,
the,
but yeah.
I think the mobility is done in a different way, right? When we're speaking about mobility, we also need to now say I don't have a car, but and if I come to Dallas, then I will have to say, hey, Havas, can you drop me to a train
Yeah,
station?
that's such.
That shouldn't be
Yeah,
there. Yeah,
that's like relying on somebody else's for your work,
absolutely.
and
Yeah,
it's as your business model itself is
yeah,
convenience, keeping
yeah.
that out
So
there.
the point the point that I'm trying to make is when we are speaking about mobility, just put cars and just put the vehicles out of the way and think about yourself, right? Walking is a form of mobility. Cycling is a form of mobility. Sharing a ride is a form of mobility. Taking a train is a form of mobility. Flying on a plane is mobility, right? So we need to design our cities and infrastructures based on our needs of mobility, not on the vehicles need to consume more fuel. Okay.
Yeah, and regarding that, like
Yeah.
designing the infrastructure, you started
Hmm.
your uh, company based on the need of the people. You really try to fulfill that need of people from who wants to go back home after their work and try to fulfill that
Mhm.
big hole where there's no available transportation, there's no enough microbus, or there's no enough bus or any service at all in Kathmandu Valley, and you try to fulfill a little bit of your service to the public. How has it, from your perspective, how has your company impacted the lives of the people?
Look, before we began this service, and we're talking about Nepal, where people are not exposed to Uber and not even they would not even know the use of apps to call a vehicle. There are number of challenges with our lack of ability to read maps, our lack of mapping infrastructure, which governments should have done, and the lack of locations, and so on and so forth, and of course the dense population and small alleys and nooks and corners of the city. So there were twofold challenges. One was the lack of people's education on using maps and technologies and 4G. The second was the nature of the city itself. Okay, but what we tried uh, 5 years ago was we tried to educate people on changing their behavior. That hey, you could do this. And it was a time where people didn't believe that you could actually use an app and summon a bike. People didn't even believe that you could actually drive a motorbike, have someone at the back, and make an income out of it. Because a lot to do with entrepreneurship is not merely solving a problem, it's about changing human behavior in mass, in large numbers. And that behavior of giving and taking a ride didn't exist before we came along. So, we're really glad and happy that we didn't start a company, we started an industry that changed people's behavior of using an app to go from point A to point B, and pretty much it's now become a norm.
Is
It doesn't matter.
the Tootle one of the earliest one? I know there's a couple
It's the
of
first
others
one.
as well.
Tootle is the first one.
Okay.
Yeah, we started so we're very glad to have started the industry.
Yeah, I want to apologize myself because I do not. It's been forever since I've been back home in Nepal, so I
Hmm.
don't know the
Hmm.
culture and how many people use cell phone and use services. So from the way things are looking, everybody, most of the people in at least in Kathmandu Valley, are educated enough to start. They can start up their account in Tootle and call the right apps. I would not say everybody,
Yeah,
but it's people are getting more
look,
informed, are they?
look. If my grandmom can be on Facebook, who's never been educated, and watch Facebook videos, there's a strong imperative for people to use our apps, right? So,
Everybody's grandmoms are
uh,
in Facebook nowadays.
yeah. So now think about that. I mean, people, it's entrepreneurship has a lot to do with changing human behavior. Yeah, it's that simple as that. But changing human behavior is the most difficult thing.
So, from your perspective, you started the company, and your main primary hurdle was almost the behavior of the people to trust your service.
Uh, it's not just about trusting the service, it's about changing human behavior in large number. Okay. Uh, if I were to ask you what problem did Google solve? It's a difficult question, isn't it?
It is.
If I were to ask you what problem did Facebook solve? Difficult question, isn't it? But if I were to ask you what behavior did Google change? It's much more simpler answer,
It is.
right? Uh, Tesla, why is it the most valuable company? What problem does it solve? Tesla does
What?
not solve mobility problem,
Yeah.
isn't it? Because it's already been solved by it's been already solved by the Henry Fords and the General Motors and other companies and Toyotas of the world.
Yeah,
But if I
Teslas
were,
and
but
other
what
are the what problem do they solve is, I guess those are like pointed question. they solved manufacturing problem or any
Yeah,
technological
but but
problem.
but
But as you
but what
said,
is Tesla trying to do is Tesla is trying to change human
yeah,
behavior
and
to
that's the
adopt
bigger part, the bigger
electric,
picture of it.
the sustainable mobility, the
Mm,
electric mobility, isn't it? And the way they did it was that you cannot have an electric car,
mm,
which is lousy in the way it looks and the way it drives. It needs to be a supercar because if
mm.
you're competing with the fuel guzzling Ferraris and McLarens of the world, I mean, electric cars should demonstrate that it is more able
Mhm.
than any of the competitors that are on internal combustion engine. So,
Yeah.
what they're trying to do is they're trying to change human behavior. Innovation starts by thinking about solving a problem.
Mm,
The problem at Tesla was you innovate to try to solve the sustainability energy problem,
mm.
but you continue by changing human behavior.
Yeah. Uh,
So
when
for any entrepreneur, yeah,
yeah, just when
go
about
ahead.
just comparing Tesla. When I came to States and heard about Tesla and their beginning, I almost felt like, well, Nepal has Safa Tempo. We
Mhm,
already run electric vehicle for public transportation, and why does
mhm,
US not have anything as that sort? Almost felt like Nepal beat United States for electric
mhm.
vehicle up here.
Well, you know, it's a very difficult question because U.S. During the last uh, 4 years under Trump's presidency, they actually exited the Paris
Mm,
Climate Accord, which has recently been
mm,
uh, again entered into by Joe Biden. So, why is a very natural question, and
mm.
I think you guys have
Yeah, there's a
U.S. has
lot of
a
political
very
and
complex.
complex.
It's more of a political
Mm.
problem than environmental one.
Yeah, I almost
Uh,
feel like even no matter what the policy, even if you are in uh, Paris Climate Accord or not, the need for
mm,
people to innovate and bring up new green vehicle, with,
mm.
even without the government intervention,
Look,
is almost a demand by people themselves.
yeah, look. Having a green vehicle is not just the solution.
Yeah.
It's about efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's nothing as an electric car. Uh, every car is a car with an electric motor.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If I have a diesel generator being pumped in my house because there's load shedding, and then I'm charging that electric vehicle with that diesel power,
Mm.
it's a diesel powered car. It's not an electric car because it is charging through an energy source that is coming through diesel.
Yeah.
Okay, even if it's a Tesla or any other vehicle, uh,
It's
you
mostly
need
powered by,
to
right now, at least in United States, it's mostly powered by coal and nuclear,
coal.
and some part
Yeah,
solar and hydro as well.
yeah. So coal is a bad fuel.
Yeah.
Nuclear is a clean fuel. So most of the electric cars, most of the Teslas are still coal cars.
Mm,
Okay, but what we need to understand is that you need to increase the efficiency.
mm,
So if you're in a public transportation, if you're dropping off your trucks and using public transportation, then you're being more efficient. Your carbon footprint, your energy footprint is coming down. Okay, so the greatest innovation that Elon Musk is aiming at
mm.
is that look, you need to understand this that if you're talking about energy, the battery itself uh, has very low power density. Okay, so I would say that a Tesla car battery would be 500 kilowatt per kg.
Yeah, they're trying to decrease that. Yeah.
So they're trying to
Or
increase that.
increase that. My bad.
But if you're comparing that with a diesel, diesel has 12,000 kilowatt per kilo. So that's the reason why you'd never have in near future, you are less likely to have an electric powered plane that crosses the Atlantic
Mm,
because it will be really heavy, isn't it? Because to have the same amount of energy, you need a very large size battery.
mm,
Okay. So what Tesla and Gigafactory they're trying to do is they're trying to increase the capacity.
mm.
So a lighter battery would give you more power. So when you're talking about, say, the innovation on public transport, it's not necessary to have electric cars or electric buses. What you need to have is more people move around in a way that consumes less energy.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
so if you have more public transit, if you have more people crossing the cities and sharing a public transit, that in itself would be a huge impact to climate. Um, than using your big size trucks to go from A to
that's
B.
as you said, that's a whole condition of changing a behavior, and that's
Mm.
harder. That's harder to change than just starting something that initiates behavior. So you started your company basically does that, does help
Mhm.
reduce carbon footprint of people can use your service so that they don't have to bring their car to the destination, just use whatever is already running. And that I guess that's indirectly changing the people's behavior of helping out reduce the carbon footprint, I guess, footprint.
Yeah. So what we're doing is we are, with the use of the app. Today we are trying to use sharing behavior. Now, 5, 10 years down the line, we hope that all our vehicles would be electric because here it's a clean energy. It's more of hydroelectric energy. It's cleaner, right? And we hope to transform the mobility infrastructure. And Kathmandu is a wonderful place for sustainable mobility. Unlike anywhere else in the world, we travel less distances. Our communities are organized in a different way by which we can actually make it happen. But and with so much of young people, a young population here, I think by igniting that change in behavior would have a long-term and sustainable impact on how people move around and how people access to economic opportunities in more sustainable way. So it's just the beginning of a journey today, but we hope that with our impact can only be measured 10 years down the line as to what we've done.
So let's go a little bit in depth about your company. Do you? So right now, I found out there's about almost 1 million downloads for app. Was it
Mm, mm.
million or? Uh, I got my data. I don't know if I just checked it. I forgot. I completely forgot. But there's a lot of downloads of
Did
your app, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
people who are in service, people who are using
Hmm.
your app for jobs as well as as a customer. So
True.
how that's a big number, then way more than what I expected. And how
Hmm.
do you think this has turned out for the community of Kathmandu Valley?
For the community,
Yes.
I think it's given them again. I told you it's given them a freedom of movement,
Or
right?
not in that sense, but like, how has they responded? Has they been
Well, then,
appreciative?
of course, I mean they have appreciated. Of course, when it comes to services like ours that touch their daily lives, there are also questions raised. But now it's become a norm for people to use Tootle to move from point A to point B anywhere they go. Um, and they have really and truly appreciated uh, our work because at the end of the day, we just help them move around, isn't it? And the second thing is that uh, as Tootle, your biggest competitor does not exist. Your biggest competitor should be the government with the public transportation infrastructure. And it is also very less likely that we would have a public transportation infrastructure of public transit and subways in next 10 years. I feel it is very less likely. So we need to fill in a gap and we should take our role and the people in the valley and outside the valley appreciate what we've done.
Yeah. I'm just gonna ask. I remember when Uber and Lyft was getting popular in the United States, there were a lot of questions and a lot of people had a lot of questions and they were not satisfied. Some people were happy, and there was a big struggle within the community of Uber or Lyft users and the other sector of public transportation as well as the government. In your perspective, what was, I would say, has has there been a pushback for your service from other sectors in Nepal?
But yes, I mean, we've faced challenges. We do continue to face them. But because we touch people's lives and we help people move around, they have come to our rescue. We've been to the courtrooms. We've had our struggles with the government.
What was the
But
main issue?
it was the issue with the taxi drivers not thinking that
Oh,
we should be allowed to run our
that's
services. So it's the
exactly
same.
the problem here in the United States.
Yeah.
The same.
So
There's taxi union who said,
it's not only in the
yeah,
United States.
it's
It's
everywhere.
everywhere in the world. I mean, it's in United States, in Europe, it's in Middle East, it's in Malaysia, it's everywhere. So and it's not uncommon. It's very common. So that is continuing. So but that's fine. I mean that's the way it is.
Yeah, I almost feel like there would not be an end of people pushing back on your service because, as you said, the taxi service or other services that compete indirectly to your service, they would always want to have a monopoly of what they provide services to the people. But overall, to
True.
the general public, what having more options, more facility to take a ride and to reach their destination is always for the benefit of having more services like yours. And has one more question, like one of the main problem I feel, probably you might have heard a lot of people asking, is Tootle like this is one really common question. People are afraid to take a ride with stranger. So this is, I guess,
Hmm.
the same with the behavior, taking a ride with a stranger. How would you say like
Yeah.
why Tootle is probably even better than taxi in taking a ride with a stranger?
I mean, see, look. When you're taking a taxi ride, you're still taking a ride with a stranger, isn't it?
Yeah. Every this is such a long question and every people ask it. It's like I don't want to take a ride with stranger. I'm like you literally have their information on your phone. How?
Look. It's a your human brain does not think rationally most of the time, and this is one of those instances. Um, and I've answered this on several forums, but the easiest way I can actually explain people is um, your chances of dying on a plane crash is 20 times less than while crossing the street. Okay, but most of the people fear flying plane than crossing the street because you don't fly every day, but you cross the street 20 times a day, isn't it? Because that builds onto your daily behavior. And anything that is your daily behavior, howsoever dangerous it may be, you do not question those behaviors. So it's same with taxi because we've been used to taking taxis with strangers, and we've been used to traveling in a public bus with strangers, taking a public transit with strangers for donkey's years, and you don't question that behavior, isn't it? But when you're taking a ride on a Tootle, we know who the person is, we know their numbers, you know your details, but still you question that because it's a new behavior. So it takes time for people to sink into a new behavior. You're always scared to take a detour, isn't it, to your house. You're always scared to take a new road, a newer route to your place. So it is a human behavior, but at the end of the day, you're always taking rides with strangers. In this case, we know who they are, and we have apparatus in place by which we can make your rides more secure and safe
Yeah,
and improve our
regarding
services.
safety and security, a lot of the people, I guess, female travelers are more. They don't have a strict way of saying. They would feel more conscious. I would say they don't want to trust the service right away because of Nepal has a lot of incidents of not as a Tootle but more as a in transportation and
Hmm.
sexual harassment and other cases, especially in
Hmm.
Kathmandu Valley.
Hmm.
A lot of people have I guess, legitimate question regarding how safe is it. I know
Okay.
I have a, as you said, behavior in the behavior
Hmm.
of me as how I am surrounded in United States culture. I don't even think about that way. But for people
Mm.
in Nepal who are more conservative on having those kind of new, changing the way of transportation, how would you assure them to have this is really secure and this is even probably better than taxi?
Look, so what we're doing is right now, as we speak, we're training around 8,000 bikers on sexual harassment. So every day there are 300 to 400 of our partners, of our drivers, who take a training, from a very reputed organization in terms of the safety measures and sexual harassment. So that's our duty. We feel that we need to conduct these trainings and help our bikers educate, because it's more of a social problem than Tootle problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because if there's a man who harasses a woman, that person, whether he's riding a motorcycle on Tootle, or is in a public transportation, or having tea at a gully, he would still do that.
Yeah.
It's a problem with our education. It's not the problem with where he is, but it's a problem with our education, because we never made these things come out in the textbooks as we educated them.
Yeah, you
Okay,
almost having that, as you said, having an education based on sexual harassment for your employees. That's a really great
they're
step
not our
forward.
employees. They're not our
Oh,
employees. They
yeah,
are
contract
partners, right?
partners.
So we conduct that training, and we feel that it's about educating them. Uh, so it should have been done through our own curricula education system, but unfortunately that's not the case. So I think it's our duty to do that.
Yeah, you taking a step is definitely in the right direction for sure. And do you feel like it's making progress with regards to educating the people's behaviors? Taking this our rideshare system is at its best. We can whatever we are doing, and we'll always progress in.
See, what we can do is we can make efforts.
Mm.
Okay, we can make efforts towards educating more people and try to change their behavior. Because what is a level of acceptance? And that level of acceptance only changes as more people are educated. I mean, in US, till mid 20th century, black people and white people had different seats in a bus, and it was perfectly acceptable for them. And a large group of people, they resisted that black and whites should go to the same school.
Yeah, there was segregation
Yeah,
all over.
yeah. And till 1916, women were not allowed to vote, isn't it? Because they felt that it was perfectly okay, because that was an assumption made on their own conscience and the kind of education that they had. So 20 years ago, it was perfectly okay for a man to harass a woman, and by harassment I mean not just a physical harassment, but by just looking into a woman, because that is the context that people grew up into because of lack of education, isn't it? But we need to change that. We need to make sure that everyone needs to understand. They're sensitized um, around around the fact that sexual harassment is not only about physical harassment, which people feel it is. Okay, it is about more to do with non-physical harassments, and this is something that we want to help. We want to educate people. So we want to tell them that, like 20 years ago, it's not okay to look at a woman for 20 seconds. It's not okay to text them without their consent. It's not okay to stalk and then give them a call. It's not okay, right? So those are the things that we're trying to do, and we're trying to make them more sensitized on the issues of sexual harassment, and we're happy to have done that.
And with your service, I feel a lot of people, a lot of especially ladies, feel empowered to travel around the Kathmandu Valley using your service. You are giving them, as you said, a chance in mobility. And
Mhm.
I just heard a recent news. I don't know if that's a government policy of the ladies not being able to travel, or the immigration where they have to be more than 40 years old to.
Oh,
I just wanted to,
yeah.
because I just heard it and I researched it a little bit, but I want to get the on the ground report of what is happening in there, and because these things
Look,
impact even
look,
your
look,
business.
look. See, if you look at the world, right, it's a world that's designed by men for men.
Mm.
You know, and it's sad. I mean, if you think about such policies, it's a random bureaucrat who might have come up with these rules to restrict women, isn't it? Because they feel that they can come up with such obnoxious um, things that you can't even comprehend. Now think about a woman having to take a consent from your
What I,
family just to move around. I mean, why can't women move around?
mm.
Why do men have to protect them, and why can't they just do it by themselves? So basically, the problem is more structural because the world, as we see, is more designed by men for men, and you can find that if you have to walk through from say Pulchok to Jaula Hill in Kathmandu, okay. Uh, so if a man walks from point A to point B from Pulchok to Jaula Hill, uh, and compare a woman walking the same street, how many toilets are there? Because
That's
women would have
yeah,
needs of sanitation, of hygiene, but men can pee everywhere. I mean, they can stand by a tree and
true.
just pee, but women can't. How many toilets have we built?
That's
Okay,
such a
how wide
obvious
are
question, and there's like no
yeah,
answer.
yeah, how wide are sidewalks? Because it would be women who would be taking care of the babies when they're young, so maybe they're more likely to take strollers up, right? How feasible it is for them? Can they change their nappies of the babies as they walk? So if you look at the entire infrastructure, it's designed for men who can just pee randomly in the streets. Okay, and the reason why you don't find public toilets, and even in US, I feel it's the same, right?
Uh, at least
But
in the United
but
States, you go to a public, I guess, cafe or anywhere. There's a lot
yeah,
of restrooms, but I get this is completely different up here. It's you never think it as way because Nepal
yeah.
has such a problem in
So it's
basic,
a structural problem. Now
yeah,
now
structure
think
problem.
if on that urban planning, when you plan to create such spaces, if there was a woman or a group of women who would have this discourse with men as to how we should design the sidewalks, right? And then women would say that, okay, we have this sanitation need, but how are you going to create those spaces? Then the conversation is different, isn't it? Then we need to have a world and an infrastructure that is equitable to everyone, that can be accessed by everyone equally. So as much as we see this 40 years old is a ridiculous policy, but it also builds on to how our infrastructure is designed. Yeah.
The the pol-
Unfortunately,
the policy itself, from what I found, was like they haven't passed it, but that even came up to the table. That brings a lot of question, like how their mentality is.
absolutely. I mean, just having that policy on table of restricting women who's already lived more than half of their life, uh, if we were to take our average age in Nepal, is absolutely ridiculous because you are restricting women with their freedom of mobility or freedom of movement, right? This is very regressive, and you cannot condone such policy thought process. I'm sure that policy would never be passed, but just to be thinking of such things, speaks volumes about how patriarchal our society is. It
Definitely.
reflects
And
both on policies
mhm.
and infrastructure.
Yeah, I definitely. When I first heard it, it's just like, what is happening? Sorry, I thought Nepal was like progressing towards being modernized, having equality, and Nepal was pretty forward in providing equal rights. But there's always a creeping patriarchal structure within the system where
Mm,
the male always the pretty much every services are preferred to the male society, or I guess the male side of the society, where even I wanted to ask you that because your service, what the Tootle provides,
mm,
is a break for a lot of women to travel by themselves, so they don't have to depend on somebody else to take them somewhere else. I don't have to call my
yeah,
brother. I don't have
absolutely.
to call somebody else. You can depend on them. Gives ladies or anybody, guys, ladies, anybody, extra freedom, extra wings to travel to without uh, being dependent on cars or taxis and having unsure like if you can find a taxi there or not.
Mm.
Do you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Go ahead.
that was the whole idea because how you could liberate people with the freedom of movement was very important, and we're glad that more than 50% of our, or at least 50% of our rides are taken by women because
That's
they
a
can
big
leverage
number.
our service. Yeah, so they can leverage to move themselves to move from point A to point B
What's
at
the
their will.
average like a number of people that takes your service?
We have a large number. We are into thousands.
Okay.
So I'll not disclose the exact number, but we are into thousands. But
Every
half of
day?
them are female every day.
Wow, that's a whichever number that is, but that's big, and for
Yeah.
especially for people from Kathmandu, that's a huge number.
It's a good number, and we still need to grow ourselves. But the way we think is that you need to provide dignity and mobility for everyone.
Mm.
Okay, so when a woman moves, they're now dignified because they don't have to rely on anyone
Mm.
to move around.
So
So it's
uh, how
yeah.
reliable is your software itself? Uh, because a lot of apps, developing country, I know you have a lot of amazing software developers. So how reliable is the app themselves? I just went up and checked a few Google review. As
Mm.
any app would have, there would be some positive and some negative. So do you think your app is competitive with others?
We are improving ourselves, and it's a very complex technology. One needs to understand,
Mm.
right? Because if you were to make a digital payment, your payment can wait if the app does not work for 1 hour or 2 hours.
Mm.
Our app needs to be up 24 into 7 and 24 hours into a day, and 30 days a
Every
month
day.
and 365 days a year, every moment. People, because people want to move, they want to move.
Mm.
So it's a very complex platform, and in last 8 months, we've switched from our old platform to the new platform, and we're still working on improving, and we've improved significantly. But trust me when I say this, that we built everything here. Every pixel of our app is developed in Nepal,
Made in
and we
Nepal.
need to, yeah, 100%.
Mm.
So we need to research. We fail, we learn again, and we are on our way to making it more reliable. And people love our service, but we still need to improve. The day we feel we don't need to improve, and the day I say that we are 100% reliable and better than anyone else, that's the day we start dying. So we need to improve, even though
There's
we
never
surpass
stopping
our own
of improvement. As anybody would
absolutely.
say, you were giving example of Elon Musk and his works.
Hmm.
His concept of the Tesla cars is it's almost as same as yours, where you say reduce the carbon footprint, and he's
Hmm.
all his vehicle updates every single day. So whenever he takes releases a car, one car produced is better than the I guess the newest car is always better than the old car a day before. So every day they're
Hmm.
improving, and they're adjusting to
Yeah,
that.
we need to improve every
Mm.
day, and the fact that we have been here for quite a while is also a testament to our resilience.
Mm.
We're just ordinary people who try to do extraordinary stuff. That's simple. We're just we just Tootle is just a group of very ordinary people.
So, talking
As
about
simple
those
as that.
ordinary people, how did you form your team? I want to know, and I want to get some education regarding the entrepreneurship, because a lot of people, somebody of our audience might be listening to you who would want to start a new business, want to get started. I want to build a company. I have funds. I have people I know. I have ideas. How did you start from your idea to having this software or like this app?
Look, it's a continuous process. I'd be very unfair to say that, okay, this is how it started and this is how it went. And it's a continuous process, but you got to start somewhere. You got to have confidence in the people that you work with. You just find people. You find people and give them the courage to think out of the box. Give them a courage to learn new things. Give them a courage to fail, and that's how Tootle was built. Like I said, we are still a very group of very ordinary people. But what we have is a sense of resilience, and we are willing to try out new things. So every entrepreneur needs to start, and start at a point where you can risk failing, and you learn, you grow, and you fail. You learn, you grow, and you fail. So it's entrepreneurship is never a process of a steady growth. You'd never have a exponential growth. Every growth will come with valleys. There would be peaks, there would be valleys every time. Whether it's Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, everyone has to go through this sinusoidal kind of a wave where you have those things. But the idea is to start. The idea is to start.
Did you start
And
with people that you knew with, or was it the idea that you started with?
no, it's the people that we knew with, right? So and a lot of things to do with entrepreneurship has to do with optimism. And that's something that's a great quality that people in Silicon Valley have. US as a country is a country of optimists, isn't it? Because basically you move to US, and I think the kind of textbooks that you read there and here are the same. Okay, 2 plus 2 is 4 here, 2 plus 2 is 4 there. There's no fundamental difference in the theory of gravity that you learn in Kathmandu University or MIT. But when you're meeting with the grad school students, when you go to Silicon Valley, when you go to colleges and university, there's a sense of optimism that people in US have, that we can actually change the world for better. And that optimism drives entrepreneurship. The reason why Silicon Valley is the most innovative place, and the place which is the cradle of entrepreneurship and innovation and invention, is that it comes through that sense of optimism. And for anyone who wants to begin the journey as an entrepreneur needs to be an optimist. Okay, so you fail, you try again, but never lose the optimism.
Yeah, that's really pretty way to. That's, I would say, not just pretty, but that's a very hopeful way to put it. And a lot of people, I guess, me as being here in the States for such a long time, and we do have discussions. Like I've been here for almost 12 years, and I know people who have been here even longer or even shorter. But there's always a talk of I want to go back and do something. For me, I had my own way, and I have my own destination that I want to reach. But for a lot of people, they are stuck in states working. They have potential, but they almost feel like going back would crush it for some reason, and they feel like, oh, I want to go back. And some people do, but they almost feels like because of the culture, and they kind of grew up here. I mean, they grew up in Nepal. They came here. They became an adult here. And when you go back, the culture is a little different, and everything messes up. So there's a lot of positive as well as negative connotation with people just being able to come to the United States or go back. What do you say? What would you say to people who wants to do something for Nepal but feel like, oh, I don't know if should go back, or maybe I should do it from here. What
Yeah.
is your perspective in that?
Look, I mean, if you're talking about people who want to say that, oh, we want to do something for Nepal,
Mm,
uh, you know, I think if you want to do something for Nepal, do it for yourself first.
mm,
When you say I want to do something for Nepal, it feels that, oh, I'm privileged and I need to help these people.
mhm,
No,
mhm,
treat Nepal as a market. Okay, that perspective needs to change. I've lived in US and I need to do something for Nepal, home country. There are enough people who can do
mm,
here, right? So that narrative should change. That's my opinion.
mm,
Right? Rather than saying I want to do something for Nepal, they should be saying I want to do something in Nepal.
mm,
Okay, so that's difference. The second thing is that about the culture. If someone's born in Nepal, goes to US, and then all of a sudden the accent comes in, and you become more individualistic, and then you go back and you feel that you can't assimilate in the Nepali society, which is not true,
mm,
because your culture is also a function of your DNA and your genetics. Okay, there's a difference between our culture and the culture of so the West culture is more of an individualistic culture.
mm,
The Eastern Asian culture is more of collective culture because uh, there's a there's a difference in DNA. I think it's some D7 gene that 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 decides whether you're an individualistic culture or a collective culture. So even if you've been living in US, your culture does not change.
mm,
If they say that no, my culture has changed to being in US, they're lying. It's not
mm.
true because your genetics does not change. It's only the way you live with people that change.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's just getting
so
used to the basic facility that you are so used to it. You almost feel
oh
like
yeah, yeah,
Nepal doesn't have this and
yeah,
that. I might not adjust.
yeah.
I'm
That's the
guilty
thing.
of that as well.
Yeah, so it's nothing to do with the culture, isn't it?
Mm,
It's to do with the other facilities. Here, you might have to wait for a little longer
mm.
in the fuel pumps. But on the hindsight, you don't need to get off the car in the cold and put the gas yourself. Someone else will do it for you.
Mm.
Okay, so
Some things are even
so
better there.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, and I have a lot of friends who have moved back. I also have a lot of friends who've been living in the West for the last 25 years.
Mm,
Okay, so your culture does not change, and I think uh, that question of saying that we cannot assimilate in the Nepali society, I would feel that it's not true.
mhm. It's definitely gives you a lot of. It makes me think.
Yeah,
I have
because
my own path,
yeah,
but a lot of people
yeah,
does have that discussion. And when we see people like you innovating
mhm,
and starting up something really great, it gives a
mhm,
lot of people a lot of hope. And that's why I wanted
mhm.
to ask is like, what do you feel is missing? I mean, culturally in
See,
Nepal, there's almost something missing
the,
that's failing to call back
look,
people.
look, you we cannot say we can call people back. It's up to people to come back and see.
Mm,
I've traveled quite a fair bit. I've been to and I've met a lot of Nepali youngsters. Last year I was in Sydney in an event organized by the
mm,
diaspora. I flew to New York. New York. I've been to and I've been meeting a lot of Nepali people. And if you come to Kathmandu, Kathmandu is as vibrant, if not more, than any of the cities that I've visited. Okay, and you have a lot of progressive young people who want to do something. We had a women's march yesterday, which we couldn't imagine happening 10 years ago.
mm,
We have many progressive youngsters who want to get into politics, who want to get into entrepreneurship, uh, and it's a vibrant youth. It's just like a cultural revolution that's happening. There have been music. People are playing jazz. People are doing arts. People are doing theaters. They're doing monologues. It's a vibrant society. I mean, the growth of the society is dictated by how the young people perceive themselves. They're perceiving themselves as artists, musicians, And that's a great indicator of where we are going. Of course, we do have significant legacy problems, legacy in our politics, legacy in bureaucracy, legacy in the way we do things. But if you look at the promise that the youngsters bring in, with the vibrance and the change and the energy and the way they want to question everything that comes from the bureaucracy and the government, I think there's no reason why we can't be hopeful about the situation in future.
Culturally,
And I'm really
yeah. And culturally, do you think this will continue for years to come, or has there been? There's always a push and pull back with any
Mhm,
culture, even being Western, getting used to
mhm,
Western cultures. There's always a little bit of pushback. Like you might have, as you said, there's some pushback even for Tootle for getting people used to it, or there's pushback from the governments and so on. For entrepreneurship and to start up business, what do you think is the pushback that a lot of people try it and they fail, or they need some kind of motivation? What do you think has been a pull or push factor?
yeah, I think the biggest thing is that we don't believe in excellence, right? I've always seen that in the West. I don't know, you know about yoga, right? They call it yoga. It's actually yoga. But the West, they mastered it and they rebranded it as yoga, and everyone's now adopting it. So there's a pose in yoga called triangle pose. But the real name of that pose is called trikonasana. Trikon means triangle. No one knows trikonasana. They call it triangle pose because the Westerners rebranded it. So, you know, what we can learn from the West is how they can brand things, how can they can tell stories and make it their own. And that is, I think, living in US, you guys bring in that asset of branding everything. Just look at the SMSs that flood your phone, the messages, like just the drive pass. Everything is branded. Everything is, they're just luring they're they want the share of your mind. In Nepal, I think that is something that we need to bring in. We do have um, opportunity to innovate because there are significantly large number of issues that we need to handle and take care of: mobility, payments, there could be energy, and number of issues that we need to tackle. But we need a fresher perspective of how we can brand as global companies. So when you spoke about what are the hindrances, there are a lot, and I don't want to speak about anything because those things will be everywhere. Okay, because as human beings, we're not accountable to ourselves, and we would like to blame that it's because of the policies that we had to fail. If it were for the policies, I would never have started to begin with. If it were for the law, so we shouldn't be speaking about what are the hindrances because
It's
it's a
always going to
way
be
people
there.
find a
We
yeah
just
it's a way people find excuse for themselves. What we need to think about is what are the values people can bring in by coming back. And I
and
think the optimism and the learning of how you can brand and things like that are very important.
as you said, with the branding itself, you find that a lot interesting in that sense. The United States has done well better with branding and marketing. Almost feels there's always a positive and negative, and a lot of people say it's commercialization of a lot of things, and that's kind of ruining in the United States. Or,
Mm.
but there's a lot of positive aspect of it, and there's of course the seeing an ad. Nobody likes to see an ad, but that's
Yeah,
where the things get monetized, and that's where the funding
yeah.
comes from.
Look,
Right?
what happens with branding is that if you look at the 20th century when people started branding the Coca-Colas and the alcohols and everything, uh, the brand stories. Brand is nothing but stories. Okay, how well you tell the stories. But the branding that was done in the past was because most of the people would not have access to information the way we have it today in internet and everything. So people would believe in anything that you'd share. So branding in 50 years ago, that US mastered was telling fictional stories. Okay, but today young people are different. They are aware. They're aware of things. They are more aware of what's happening. They're more accountable towards society. They're more accountable towards the environment. And today, if you're doing the right thing, then you just tell them the true stories, the true stories of how you're impacting the society, how you're lessening the impact on climate change, how you're changing people's lives and creating jobs. So we need to move from fiction to the facts in terms of how we brand today compared to how we branded 20 years ago or 30 years ago in the pre-information era. So the way we think of branding needs to change. But stories are there. The only difference is that we need to move from fiction to fact. Coca-Cola is a big fiction.
It
Isn't
is.
it? It amplifies your expression. Now,
So from what I've heard, there's a lot of rules. People are not supposed to open the stalls. I know that it had
no,
changed
no, no.
now. A lot of businesses were
It,
down. People are
yeah,
only used.
it's
They can take taxi, but not bikes. That's what I heard.
no. They can do pretty much everything, and it's as if there's no COVID. Fortunately, the cases are coming down. When we speak to the doctors and the hospital, it's really surprising how the cases went down. Maybe the virus itself was weak in our region. We don't know, but
Yeah,
we had challenges when we were under a lockdown. But things are easing up, and the city is getting back to normal. We do, of course, wear masks when we go outside and meet people, but it's not a lockdown, and I think the mobility is. The schools are closed still, but mobility has become functional. We have a lot of cramped public buses as it used to be.
on that,
The fact that the fact that political parties have held rallies with hundreds of thousands of people
and
on
they
the
don't
streets. So
on the street packed
yeah,
always. Do they?
yes.
I know
So
they
there are
did
no rules
have.
there.
I know they did have some rules, but when it came up to them being on the street, all the rules were like neglected.
There are no rules with that. You can't have 100,000 people in street and still be able to follow rules where people are chanting loud rhetorics up from the stage.
Yeah, having your service, Tootle, and to be compliance with the COVID in the safety as general, without the rules, just as personally, I think the bike and scooters are pretty safe compared to being
Yeah,
in box with a car. So
yeah, they're
I
very
would,
safe.
yeah, and I would not think that would matter because I knew they had some kind of rule barring people to have people bikes to have people in behind them, which I felt like that's a
Yeah,
stupid rule.
it was stupid. Bikes would be more safe because number one, it's on the open. Number two, the one of them is wearing a helmet and facing a different direction. Helmet itself acts as a face shield, and a mask inside would even be better. So two people wearing a helmet, one person wearing a helmet, the other one at the back wearing a mask. I think it's pretty safe, given that it's in the open. So
Yeah, that's pretty obvious and common sense thing. Once the government has to be on the streets, the COVID does not exist. Almost same here
no,
in the
not at all.
States as well.
Right.
And I think we have a really good productive talk today. And I would lastly want to ask you regarding yourself, like where is Tootle going now and maybe 5 years from now? Do you vision yourself really growing, or is there a different route that Tootle is taking?
No, I think what we are set out to do is create a mobility infrastructure. See, look, when internet began 30 years ago, yeah, 30 years ago, yes. In the late 90s, we used, or early 2000, we used internet as a service. We used to go to cyber cafes, check the email, pay 30, 40 rupees and come back, right? It was a service. 10 years later, internet became an infrastructure, which means that you're connected 24 into 7. If you're talking about Nepal back in 10 years ago, digital payment was a service. And with what phone pays and these companies are doing today, it's set out on building a digital payment infrastructure on top of the internet infrastructure, right? Mobility today that we offer is a service, okay? And 10 years down the line, we hope that it would be an infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, that infrastructure would be built on electric mobility, maybe Tootle charging stations all over. And our bikes, electric bikes branded Tootle, would be moving around anything and everything that moves in the city.
That's really good.
Yeah. So, and that can just happen at the tap of a app, which would look significantly different to how it looks today. Or maybe a voice command saying that, "Hey Tootle, drop a box to my home." Voila, you go.
Yeah, even Tootle can probably, I'm just putting out there, it can be more like a delivery service as well, some way. Just,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Anything and
amazing.
everything that moves.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
these are like really great lessons and great your stories that we have heard today. And I hope somebody people might get inspired and start up amazing other businesses like Tootle or bigger, something that impacts a lot of people in Kathmandu and around the world, maybe hopefully from Nepal. And hopefully it's all made in Nepal. We need more made in Nepal stuff, more made in Nepal apps, anything at all, and impact people's life for positive, and hope to see you yourself and your company do a lot better and years progressing.
Thanks, Abbas. Pleasure.